Thank you very much for this invitation to participate in the conference. I'm really pleased to be here, and thank you for also making it possible for me to participate virtually. One of the things I'm reconsidering these days is my travel, and if it's possible for me to present remotely, I'm trying to do that as much as possible to minimize my personal contribution to emissions. I'm really pleased to be able to speak to you about a project called Reimagining Museums for Climate Action, which very much picks up on some of the points which Henry's been making. And in fact, Henry is a member of the Reimagining Museums for Climate Action project team, alongside with Colin Sterling, who is my co-lead on the project, and he's based at the University of Amsterdam. And this is a project that has been developed in consultation with collaborators at the Glasgow Science Centre, and on which two sort of doctoral and postdoctoral researchers have also worked with us, Rowan Gard and Jana Oud Ammerveld. Just will share my slides now. Okay, so it's become increasingly clear that addressing the climate crisis will require systemic transformative action in all areas of social, political, economic, and cultural life. And while they might not feel like the most obvious starting point for discussions of radical climate action, we believe that museums are well placed to play a key role in this transformation. Depending on estimates, there are currently around 80 to 100,000 museums in the world. They can encourage new forms of governance and participation, support transdisciplinary research and education, and facilitate systemic change across society. However, critical approaches to the histories of museums show how hierarchical notions of race and culture, developed and perpetuated by museums, have underpinned violent practices across the globe and continue to do so today. They've also supported a vision of European and human exceptionalism that's helped to justify a harmful relationship with the natural world, encouraging ideals of progress and exploitative understandings of nature as a resource, which have themselves contributed to and underpinned the climate emergency. Climate change also poses significant challenges to the ways in which museums operate. Museums continue to consume huge amounts of energy and produce large volumes of waste, and they will need to rapidly decarbonise to play their part in the necessary transition to a low carbon future. They'll also need to shift their emphasis away from benchmarking success against economic growth, expansion, and high carbon activities, such as increased international travel and touring exhibitions. Recent years have seen an increasing number of initiatives focusing on climate change across science, art, natural history, and ethnographic museums, with exhibitions, events, festivals, and national and international partnerships aimed at raising awareness and shifting narratives. New forms of activist-led museum have emerged to confront the causes and consequences of climate change. And some museums have made public declarations of their intentions to reduce their carbon footprints and to contribute to climate action, whilst activist groups such as Culture Unchained, who are protesting here at the British Museum over oil sponsorship, have challenged museum practices, particularly around sponsorship from fossil fuel companies. And as humans have heated the planet, a significant parallel movement has drawn attention to the imperialist and colonialist origins of museums. Calls for their decolonisation through radical forms of action, including repatriation of objects to source communities and a fundamental revision of their dominant narratives, intersect with issues of climate in very important ways. The effects of climate change are obviously not equally felt, and many of those socially, politically, and economically disadvantaged groups who have suffered the greatest violence as a result of the imperial and colonial narratives developed within museums are also those who suffer and will continue to suffer the adverse effects of climate change most disproportionately. So in our work, we've been keen to particularly emphasise the need to consider the relationship between climate change and decolonising future museums. Early in 2020, we launched an international design competition to begin to think through some of these issues in detail. Reimagining Museums for Climate Action launched on Monday, the 18th of May 2020 for International Museums Day, and it asked a range of people in the public at large for their ideas about how museums would need to be radically reimagined and redesigned as institutions to help bring about more equitable and sustainable futures in the climate change era. Just to give some background to this, to reinforce what Henry was speaking about, in 1992, the world's governments committed to address the rapidly growing threat of global climate change by adopting the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, and the convention came into force in 1994. Since then, governments have met annually to monitor progress, to evaluate what further action is needed, and to agree programs of activity to combat climate change. And the main meeting is often referred to as the COP, which means the Conference of the Parties. Each is numbered, and with the exception of 2020, which was postponed until 2021, they generally occur every year. And as many of you will know, COP26, which has just taken place in Glasgow, was an important COP because under the Paris Agreement, countries agreed to report back every 5 years on their detailed plans to reduce emissions in line with the available scientific data on what needs to be done to limit global warming to at most 2 degrees and ideally 1.5 degrees. And so the idea for the project is rooted in Article 6 of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, both of which emphasize the role of institutions in facilitating public participation in action for climate. Although the UNFCCC and other important agreements, including the Paris Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals, are signed by governments, they need involvement from all of society. And both the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement recognize the importance of public education, staff training, public awareness, public access to information, public participation, and international cooperation in order to address climate change. And as Henry noted, the role of museums in supporting these activities was recognized in 2018 at COP24, where they were included in the operational plan for the Paris Agreement called the Katowice package. And museums were specifically mentioned as key institutions for facilitating public participation in action for climate in the Doha Work Programme on Action for Climate Empowerment, which was redrafted in Glasgow last couple of weeks ago at COP26, where the role of museums is similarly emphasised as key institutions. So our competition called for design and concept proposals which explored how new approaches to the organisation, experience and conceptualisation of museums could amplify and accelerate climate action in diverse contexts and at various scales, enabling museums and society to move further, faster together to a net zero or zero carbon future. And we suggested in the competition brief that the ideas could be as fantastic or as grounded as applicants saw fit. And our aim was not to judge the proposals based on their feasibility, but on the extent to which they unsettled and subverted the foundations of museological thinking in positive ways. The competition closed on the 15th of September in 2020, and it attracted over 500 expressions of interest and 264 formal submissions from 48 countries, many of them countries in the global south, with proposals from architects, designers, activists, artists, student groups, academics, Indigenous people and communities, and those already working in museums globally. We worked with a team of judges, here shown on the screen, to develop a long list of 80 proposals, after which we invited 8 teams to develop their ideas for an exhibition which would be based at the Glasgow Science Centre, which opened as part of the post-pandemic reopening of the Science Centre on the 25th of June 2021, and remained in place with some modifications throughout the duration of COP26 as part of the official COP26 Green Zone. The exhibition presented a range of proposals for how museums could support meaningful climate action. It features a range of new ideas about the things that museums collect, the stories they tell, the materials they're built of, and the ways they could support and work with communities. Some of these ideas were speculative or even fantastical, while others are already in the process of being implemented. And the global scope of these proposals from Brazil, Indonesia, Singapore, the United States, and the UK shows that museums have an important role to play in addressing climate change at the international level, tailored to a local context. So earlier this year for International Museums Day 2021, we relaunched an expanded version of the Museums for Climate Action website, which provided virtual access to the exhibition, and an additional 70 ideas and concepts from the competition. Divided into 3 sections, Rethink, Reimagine and Mobilise, the site includes research material from the project team, a suite of 79 of the submissions to the design and ideas competition, and key resources to inspire radical climate action in the sector and beyond. And during COP26, we launched 2 additional project outputs, the project or exhibition catalogue, Reimagining Museums for Climate Action, edited by Colin Sterling and Rodney Harrison, myself, and Mobilising Museums for Climate Action, Tools, Frameworks and Opportunities to Accelerate Climate Action in and with Museums, which is a practical toolkit of ideas for museums authored by Henry McGee. And both of these are freely available as ebooks to download from our Museums for Climate Action website. In the Green Zone at COP, which is the public-facing part of the COP conference, we worked with a team of volunteers to animate the exhibition for visitors and to ask for further ideas about how museums might facilitate radical forms of climate action. The physical exhibition has had an estimated 120,000 visits, and it was also part of the COP26 Digital Green Zone on Google Arts and Culture, where we were very pleased to see it listed at launch at the top of the page as one of 5 incredible ideas from the COP26 Green Zone. And we're uncertain how many people have visited the virtual exhibition, but obviously this has substantially extended the project's reach beyond the physical exhibition itself. So I wanted to, as Henry mentioned, one of the parts of the discussions at COP that we followed most closely was the redrafting of the Glasgow, what's now known as the Glasgow Work Programme on Action for Climate Empowerment. And the exhibition and the competition provided a strong exemplar for the role of museums and other cultural organisations and institutions for facilitating public participation in climate action. And museums, as Henry noted, are explicitly mentioned as key institutions for delivering on the aims of action for climate empowerment. And this is a document which will be in place for the next 10 years and on which governments need to report on their progress towards meeting the objectives of the work programme. So I just wanted to conclude with a few observations about things that we've learned from the project and from the work that we did at COP26, and in particular, how people in the public think that museums might need to change to facilitate them to take the sorts of climate action which they wish to take in their own communities and as individuals. So the first thing is to say that it's quite clear that people believe that museums have incredible potential both to communicate, but also, and perhaps much more importantly, to become facilitators for real and radical climate action. But to do this, they need to do a number of things. And in the toolkit, Henry proposes 5 practical pathways to climate action. And we would encourage anyone to download and take a look at the toolkit, which works through how to do this in detail. So the 5 practical pathways are reducing emissions in museums, supporting society to reduce emissions, ensuring museums are fit for the future to adapt to climate change, supporting society's adaptation, and ensuring that climate action is fair and contributes to broader sustainable development goals. But these practical goals for museums can only be achieved by taking further action to rethink the roles and relationships of museums in society. And to this end, I think there are another 5 ways in which museums need to fundamentally change to reimagine themselves for climate action. Firstly, they need to reckon with their histories and how those histories continue to play out in the present. As ongoing discussions about the restitution of the Benin bronzes and other colonial objects show, museums need to take a critical look at their histories and the role that the narratives that they've produced, narratives of human exceptionalism, hierarchical understandings of human culture, and an emphasis on progress and civilization, have underpinned and helped to produce the current climate crisis. Secondly, museums need to rapidly decarbonize. Museum buildings and their operations, particularly things like touring exhibitions, are incredibly carbon intensive. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this means benchmarking success differently, not in terms of numbers of visitors, but in how museums interact with and facilitate forms of social and climate action. Thirdly, museums need to take a critical look at who they associate with and the sponsorship that they receive. There's current protests at the Science Museum here in London about the sponsorship of Shell and other oil companies approving, and the work of activist groups like Culture Unstained are emphasising through their joint programme of research and protest. Fourthly, in addition to telling their own stories differently, museums need to tell different stories. And it's our contention in this project that any museum can be a climate museum. And some of the ideas in the exhibition and the various project outputs explore how this might be done in detail. And finally, museums need to see their role differently. They need to see themselves as facilitators for individuals and communities to catalyse and support them in taking the forms of climate action they wish to take, rather than as authorities. Every part of society will need to make radical changes to ensure that global heating remains below 1.5 degrees. And this includes museums and the cultural sector. Museums could, and in many cases are keen to play a leading role in these transformations. But like all of society, they will only be able to do so if they make significant changes to the ways that they operate, the stories they tell and how they're told, the sponsorship they receive, and the ways in which they perceive their roles in relation to the publics they serve. Thank you very much.